At 16, my dad kicked me into the backyard during a December blizzard with only a sleeping bag. After he gave my room to my pregnant sister, my uncle showed up and found me freezing. 3 days later, dad was in handcuffs, and mom and sister were in meltdown. Hey, Reddit. So yeah, turns out getting kicked out into a Minnesota polar vortex isn't something you just move on from. My parents always had favorites, and it wasn't me. I tried to deal, tried to stay out of the way, but they pushed things way past anything normal. Before everything blew up, cops, CPS, arrests, let me back up and tell you how it all started. I'm Lawrence. I'm 16 and living with my uncle Joseph. I've been here a little over a month. It still feels weird sometimes waking up in a house where nobody yells first thing in the morning and nobody calls me difficult before I even finish a sentence. Joseph lets me keep the door shut, lets me pick what I want to eat, stuff like that. Nothing huge, just normal things I didn't realize were supposed to be normal. Anyway, I guess the only way to explain why I'm here is to go back to when everything started slipping sideways at home. I grew up in a small house in Minnesota with my parents, Mary and Jonathan, and my older sister Cecilia. Minnesota winters don't play around, especially the part of the state we're in. People talk about fresh air and the beauty of the snow, but when it's already below zero before January even shows up, it's just cold and annoying. The house itself wasn't big. My room was the only one besides my parents that actually felt like a real bedroom. Cecilia's old room was small and shaped weird, and the basement was basically a cement box with pipes sticking out everywhere. But I made my room decent. Posters, shelves, a warm blanket, stuff like that. Things changed fast when Cecilia came home out of nowhere. This was around the time the weather started getting bad, the kind of cold where you don't want to be outside for more than a couple minutes. She showed up in the doorway with 2 bags and a baby bump that was definitely obvious. Big enough that even I could tell she was only a couple months from due. No warning, no call, just walked in like it was still her house. I expected Mary to freak out, or at least ask what happened. Same with Jonathan. But it was like they'd been waiting for this exact moment their whole lives. They hugged her right away and started saying stuff like, "Oh, honey, we'll take care of everything." And, "This must be meant to happen for our family." Nobody even asked about the dad or school or what she planned to do now. It was like the baby washed away every mistake she ever made, and suddenly she was perfect again. Meanwhile, I was standing there watching Mary grab Cecilia's bags and talk about how the house needs to be rearranged to make space. Cecilia didn't look embarrassed or apologetic. She looked comfortable. She walked down the hallway like she never left and pushed open my bedroom door to look around. She didn't ask. She just said, "This room gets good light," and nodded like she was approving a hotel. The whole mood in the house flipped within the hour. They were talking about cribs, paint colors, moving furniture, and none of them said a word to me. They acted like decisions were already made, and they didn't need my opinion. Cecilia kept mentioning the nursery suite, and Mary clapped her hands together like it was the smartest thing she'd ever heard. My room was the only spot that made sense for a nursery, but the thing that hit me was they didn't even try to pretend they'd think about another option. The basement wasn't even brought up. Cecilia's old room wasn't even brought up. At dinner that night, Cecilia sat in my usual seat. She didn't ask about school or anything going on with me. She just talked about the baby kicking and how tired she was. Mary and Jonathan looked at her the way I always wished they'd look at me. Warm, patient, excited. Later, when I tried to go to my room, Cecilia followed me right in without knocking. She pointed at my wall and said, "We'll need to paint over this. Not you, but we." Like I was part of the plan even though I had no clue what the plan was. I didn't argue. I already knew how that would go. They'd twist it into me being selfish or dramatic. So I just nodded and let her walk out like she hadn't just claimed the whole space. That was the night I started getting that feeling in my stomach, the kind you get before a storm hits. I didn't know how bad it was going to get, but I could tell something in the house had shifted in a way that wasn't going back. And I guess I was right, because that was the last week my bedroom was actually mine. Things went downhill quick after that, and the end of it is why I'm here at Joseph's place instead of under the same roof as the people who raised me. By the end of that week, Mary and Jonathan were treating her pregnancy like a project with a deadline. And I was trying to stay quiet because anything I said got twisted into, "Lawrence is being difficult again." On Monday morning, Mary called for a family meeting. She actually said it like that, standing in the hallway with her hands clasped. Whenever she used that tone, I knew it meant they'd already made a decision, and the meeting was just them rolling it out like it was democracy. We all sat in the living room. The room is tiny, so we were basically knee to knee. Cecilia took the recliner like she owned it. Mary sat next to Jonathan on the couch, holding his hand like they were about to break some tragic news. I sat on the other end because there wasn't anywhere else to be. Mary started with, "Thank you all for being here," which made me want to laugh because we literally lived there and had nowhere to go. She looked at Cecilia and smiled in this soft, rehearsed way, then at me with that tight expression she uses when she's about to tell me something I won't like. "We've been thinking very hard about how to make this home ready for the new baby," she said. "We want Cecilia to have a proper space to rest and prepare." Jonathan nodded like it was official business. "It's important the baby has stability from day one." I already knew where this was going, but I waited to hear them actually say it. Then Cecilia leaned forward and said, "My old room is too small for everything I'll need." Mary picked it up from there. "Which brings us to the decision. We think it makes the most sense for Cecilia to use your room, Lawrence. It's the only space that fits everything." They looked at me like they expected applause. I took a breath and tried to stay calm. "Why not the basement?" I said. "It's bigger than my room." "It's unfinished, yeah, but you could wall off a corner and make it work." Jonathan shook his head immediately. "Impossible. The basement isn't suitable." "Okay," I said, keeping my voice even. "What about rearranging your room? Or maybe making the living room corner into a nursery? People do that all the time." Mary frowned like I'd insulted her. "The living room is a shared family space. It wouldn't be appropriate." "And we need our room," Jonathan added. "Your suggestion doesn't make sense." Cecilia sighed loudly. "This is exactly what I mean, Mom. He's always like this. He can't just be supportive for once." She gestured at my posters like they offended her. "Look at this room. It's perfect for a crib and a dresser. And the window lighting is way better." I didn't even answer her. I looked at Mary and Jonathan instead. "You're really giving my room away?" Mary stiffened. "Nobody is giving anything away. This is about what the family needs right now." Jonathan leaned forward like he was settling a debate. "You're 16, Lawrence. Practically a man. You don't need a big bedroom to yourself. Cecilia needs it more." I tried one more time. "So where am I supposed to sleep?" That's when they showed their cards. Jonathan stood up and motioned toward the back door. "I've already prepared something for you." He said it proudly, like he'd built me a cabin by hand. We followed him outside into the yard. Snow covered everything, and the wind cut straight through my jacket. He pointed near the fence where a tent sat half buried in frost. Next to it was a sleeping bag in one of those cheap plastic bins you buy on clearance. "There," he said. "Your temporary setup. It's simple but effective. Gives you privacy, too." I stared at the tent, trying to figure out if he thought this was reasonable or if he was messing with me. "You're putting me outside, in this weather." "It's not permanent," Mary said quickly. "Just until the baby arrives and we get settled." Cecilia crossed her arms. "Honestly, you're acting like a martyr. Tons of people camp all the time, and you have a sleeping bag. You should at least appreciate that." Appreciate that. A tent in a Minnesota winter. I looked at Jonathan again. "You're actually serious." He frowned like I'd insulted him. "This attitude is exactly why we struggle with you. We offer you a solution, and you act like we're throwing you to the wolves. You should be proud to help your sister. You should feel honored even. Honored. To sleep in a tent, behind my own house." That's when I realized none of them were bluffing. None of this was a joke or a punishment they'd take back once I reacted. They had already rehearsed their lines. They had already picked the nursery paint colors. They had already decided I was the one who needed to adjust. Cecilia turned away first, already talking about cribs again. Mary followed her. Jonathan clapped his hand on my shoulder like he'd just given me a gift and walked inside. I stood there staring at the tent, the wind pushing at the sides like it wanted to flatten it. And that was the moment it clicked for me. They didn't just want my room, they wanted me gone. The first night outside hit harder than I expected, and I already knew the cold was bad. Minnesota during a polar vortex isn't something you can explain to people who haven't lived through it. The air feels sharp. Your eyelashes freeze. Even walking from the house to the backyard takes effort, because the wind pushes at you like it wants you gone. Jonathan told me to get settled before dark, so I went out back with the sleeping bag and the cheap tent he left for me. The snow in the yard was up past my ankles. I had to stomp a flat spot just to get the tent to stand up. My fingers were already going stiff, making it hard to clip the poles in place. Every time the wind hit, the tent bent like it was going to snap in half. It wasn't even a winter tent, just some thin nylon thing meant for warm weather camping. You could see light through the seams. I didn't have a lantern or anything, just my phone. And even with gloves on, I could feel the cold sinking through the fabric every time I touched something metal. By the time I crawled inside, the tips of my fingers were burning, and then immediately losing feeling. The sleeping bag was supposed to be all season, but whoever put that label on it definitely never used it in Minnesota. From inside the tent, everything sounded louder. The wind hitting the nylon made this constant flapping noise that never settled down. Around 8 or 9, hard to tell since the sky was already pitch black, I heard the house door close. Then, the click. The deadbolt. That sound traveled through the yard like someone snapping a twig. It didn't echo. It just hit once and stuck in my head. That was the moment it really sank in. They had locked me out intentionally. Not an accident. Not a misunderstanding. They didn't want me in the house. They made sure of it. Inside the sleeping bag, the cold still reached me. My breath kept fogging up in front of my face, and then freezing on the inside of the tent wall. When I touched it by accident, flakes came off like crushed ice. I pulled my knees up to my chest to try to keep warm, but my toes started to go numb pretty fast. My phone battery dropped from 70% to 30% within an hour, because the cold drains it. I tried tucking it near my abdomen to keep it warm, but it didn't help much. My old bedroom window faced the backyard. When the wind shifted and blew the branches aside, I could see straight in. The lights were on. Cecilia was in there, already acting like it belonged to her. She had a paint roller in her hand. A whole bucket sat open on the floor. She was covering my poster wall with some pale color, probably the soft shade Mary mentioned. She didn't take the posters down first. She just painted right over them. I watched her toss some of my things into a trash bag like they were clutter. The longer I watched, the stranger it felt. It wasn't just losing the room. It was watching someone erase it in real time while I sat in the snow a few yards away. At one point, she stepped closer to the window, looked out toward the yard, and made a face. She said something to Mary, who walked into the room. I could hear faint bits of their voices when the wind paused. "It just ruins the whole view," Cecilia said. Mary moved the curtain aside. "He'll adjust," she replied. "Don't let it bother you." Cecilia shook her head. "It's weird. He's right there. It makes me feel judged. Judged. By me. The person freezing in a tent because she wanted my room." I pulled the sleeping bag tighter, but it didn't help. The cold was inside it now. My fingers were tingling, and then going numb again. My breath felt heavy, like the air was trying to slow me down. Every time I moved, the bag let in another swirl of cold air. For a while, I stared at the house, lit up and warm, with everyone inside acting like nothing was wrong. I kept thinking maybe someone would check on me. Maybe someone would crack the door open and say, "Come inside for a minute." But the house stayed bright and busy without me. By the evening after the second night outside, I still hadn't warmed up. I'd gone to school exhausted, thawed out a little during the day, then came home to the same tent waiting for me like some kind of punishment box. The polar vortex hadn't eased up at all. The wind was even louder. Snow kept blowing sideways across the yard, piling against the tent walls. My hands shook just trying to zip it open. I heard a car pull into the driveway while I was struggling to straighten one of the tent poles. At first, I thought it was Cecilia coming back from whatever errands she'd invented, but the engine didn't sound like her car. Then, the front door opened and I heard a familiar voice. It was Joseph. He wasn't expected or anything. He just showed up to return a small heater he'd borrowed, the kind with the handle on top. I could hear him greeting Mary through the walls of the house. His voice carried better than theirs. "Got that heater for you," he said. "Thought I'd drop it off before it gets worse out there." Mary acted cheerful, almost too cheerful. "Oh, Joseph, you didn't have to come tonight. It's freezing." "Yeah, well," he said. "That's why people need heat." I heard him laugh a little, but it sounded confused, not happy. Something in his tone made me pause. Inside, they were all acting like it was a normal night. I could hear the TV, the clinking of dishes. It was so bizarre to hear regular home noises while I was out in the yard, trying to stop the tent from collapsing. Then Joseph's voice again. "Hey, where's Lawrence? His shoes are by the door." Cecilia answered before either of them. "He's out back, being dramatic in his tent." She said it like she was describing a kid pretending to run away with a stick and a bandana. You could hear the eye roll in her voice. Joseph didn't respond right away. I imagined him turning to Mary and Jonathan for clarification. "He's what?" he finally said. Mary spoke next, trying to sound casual. "It's temporary. He's giving Cecilia some space. He's fine." Joseph didn't buy it. I could tell by how quiet he went. He wasn't the type to ignore things that didn't make sense. A moment later, the back door opened. He stepped out onto the porch, and even from across the yard, I heard him suck in a breath. "What the hell?" he muttered. He walked through the snow toward me. The porch light threw a long shadow behind him. When he reached the tent, he brushed off a chunk of snow from the top and crouched down. "Lawrence?" he said. "You in there?" I tried to answer, but my voice came out weak and shaky. "Yeah." He unzipped the tent himself when he realized I wasn't moving fast enough. The cold light hit my face, and he stared at me like he was trying to figure out if he was seeing right. Jesus, kid, he said. Why are your lips that color? I tried to shrug, but my arms didn't want to work. It's just cold. He reached in and touched my hand. I heard him swear under his breath. You're freezing. How long have you been out here? Since the night before last. His face changed instantly. Not angry yet, just shocked. And they left you out here in this? I couldn't answer properly. My jaw was trembling, and my thoughts felt sluggish, like they were moving through thick mud. Joseph didn't wait. He helped me crawl out of the tent, supporting most of my weight because I couldn't stay steady. We're going inside, he said firmly. But when we got to the back steps and he opened the door, Jonathan was standing right there like he'd been waiting for us. What are you doing? Jonathan asked, blocking the doorway. Joseph's voice stayed steady. He's half frozen, John. He's coming inside. No, Jonathan said. He needs to learn something from this. It's building character. Joseph stared at him like he couldn't believe the words came out of his mouth. Building character? He's shivering so hard he can barely stand. Mary stepped up behind Jonathan, wringing her hands. It's temporary, Joseph. He'll be fine. You're overreacting. Joseph turned toward her. He's showing signs of hypothermia. Cecilia joined in from the kitchen. Oh my God, he's not dying. He just doesn't like being told no. That's when Joseph lost whatever patience he'd been holding on to. He stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. You evicted a 16-year-old into a polar vortex to make room for a nursery. Do you hear yourselves? Jonathan straightened his shoulders. This is our family business. You don't get to interfere. Joseph didn't argue. He didn't push. He didn't shout. He just looked at them all one more time, like he was checking to see if any of them were going to come to their senses. None of them did. All right, he said finally. Then he's coming with me. He turned away from the door, tightened his grip around my arm, and walked me across the yard toward his truck. He opened the passenger side, helped me in, and reached over to blast the heat to max. The vents roared warm air across my face, making my skin sting. As soon as he shut the door, he cranked the heat to full blast. Then he pulled out his phone and started dialing. Hang in there, Lawrence, he said. I'm calling 911. The dispatcher told him to keep driving and meet them at the hospital. I leaned back against the seat, my teeth still chattering. Through the window, I could see the house. Warm, lit up, comfortable. And for the first time, I understood Joseph completely. There was no point arguing with people who had already decided I didn't matter. I don't remember much of the drive to the hospital besides the heat blasting in my face and Joseph telling me to keep my eyes open. The closer we got, the more everything felt blurry, like my brain was lagging behind my body. When we finally pulled into the ER entrance, he ran around to open my door and basically half-carried me inside. The nurses moved fast once they saw me. One of them guided me into a room, while another brought out a stack of heated blankets. The warmth felt painful at first, like pins pressing into my skin. They slid a thermometer under my tongue and checked my hands, looking at how pale they were. Your temperature is low, one of them said. Let's get you warmed up. Someone wrapped thick blankets around my shoulders and legs, while another nurse asked simple questions. My name, age, what happened? My voice sounded uneven. I told them I'd been outside for 2 nights, and they exchanged glances but didn't say anything. A doctor came in next. He checked my fingers, pressed lightly on my toes, listened to my breathing, and made notes on a chart. Cold stress injuries, he said to a nurse. Keep the warm IV going. They put a warm IV line in my arm, and the heat spreading through my veins felt strange but comforting. My shivering slowed down a little. Joseph sat in the corner of the room, watching every step like he didn't trust anyone to miss something important. A little while later, a police officer came in. He was calm, not intense or anything. He pulled up a chair next to the bed. I'm Officer Larson, he said. I just need to get an understanding of what happened, okay? I nodded. Did you choose to sleep outside? He asked. No, I said. My dad told me to. He said my sister needed my room for the nursery. He wrote that down. Were you able to come inside at any point? They locked the door, I said. I heard the deadbolt. I tried it later. It was locked. Did you have access to warm clothing? Proper equipment? I shook my head. Only what he gave me. A tent and a sleeping bag. I hesitated. It wasn't a winter one. Joseph leaned forward a little. He was out there 2 nights, he told the officer. I found him barely coherent. The officer nodded, still writing. We'll need to take a look at the location and document it. He asked a few more questions. How long I'd been outside, whether I'd eaten, whether anyone checked on me. When I said no to that, he stopped writing for a second and just looked at me. All right, he said quietly. Thank you. After he left, the doctor came back to check my temperature again. "It's improving," he said. "You're going to be okay." But another night in that, and it could have gone much worse. I didn't need him to explain what much worse meant. While they let me rest, Joseph stepped into the hallway to make calls. I could hear pieces of his voice through the door. Words like report, minor, not optional, and CPS. When he came back in, he sat down and rubbed his hands over his face. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm staying right here. Whatever they need, I'll handle it." A couple hours passed before Officer Larson returned. He told us he'd gone to the house. "We found the tent," he said. Snow had collapsed part of it. The sleeping bag wasn't rated for these temperatures. He flipped a page in his notebook. "We also found some of your school items out there." My stomach tightened. "Which ones?" "Your backpack, some books. They were wet from snowmelt." I pictured my math book warped and frozen. My notes smudged. I hadn't grabbed them when I moved to the tent. I'd figured I could get them in the morning. Then I realized how stupid that assumption was. Nobody would have let me inside to get them. The officer continued. "We took photos. It'll all be part of the report." He paused. "Because you're 16, there's an automatic referral to Child Protective Services. A social worker will be involved from here." I nodded, even though the words felt heavy in my chest. It was strange hearing all of this out loud, like someone finally saying the thing I'd been trying not to admit. What happened wasn't normal. After he left, the doctor returned one more time to check my hands and feet again. "You'll regain full feeling," he said. "Just give it a little time. Keep them warm and don't rush anything." At one point, he looked over at me and said, "I'm not letting anyone put you in that situation again. You're with me until this is sorted." I believed him. Maybe because he was the first adult in days who'd actually looked at me and seen a person instead of a problem. I was still in the hospital the next morning when Officer Larson came back. Joseph stood up right away, like he was expecting bad news, but the officer told us they were just updating us on what happened at the house. "We spoke with your father," he said to me. "He insisted he provided you with what he called adequate shelter." I already knew what he meant. The tent and the sleeping bag. The officer sighed a little. "We explained that under these temperatures, that's nowhere near adequate. The conditions in the yard were dangerous, especially overnight." He didn't say the word deadly, but it hung there anyway. "Your father continued to argue," he added. "He said this was discipline and that you needed to toughen up. He said he was teaching you responsibility." Joseph muttered, "He's out of his mind." Larson continued. "We attempted to explain the statute. Under Minnesota law, providing a minor with clearly insufficient protection in extreme weather qualifies as child endangerment. Given your medical condition, it escalates to a felony." And he didn't build up to it. He didn't soften it. "Your father was arrested." I didn't know how to feel. Hearing it said so plainly made everything feel heavier, not lighter. Joseph sat back down slowly like he was absorbing the words one at a time. "Your mother and sister were present," the officer said. "They weren't arrested, but they were questioned. They didn't help themselves." Joseph raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "They repeated the same explanation," Larson said. "They said they needed your bedroom for the baby. They said you're old enough to adapt, and that the tent was temporary. They said the family had to prioritize the new life. Their words, not mine." I felt the heat climb up my neck even though the room was cold. I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or anger. "The house was warm," Larson added. "Fully heated. Meanwhile, your tent was half buried in snow." The contrast didn't sit well with the officers on scene. He paused for a second before continuing. "Your sister's pregnancy complicates things. CPS flagged it immediately. They'll be looking at anticipatory neglect in her case." Joseph blinked. "They're reviewing her ability to parent?" Larson nodded. "If someone is participating in the neglect of a minor in the household, or knowingly allowing it, it raises questions about the safety of her unborn child. She'll be assessed separately." It got quiet after that. Then Larson said, "CPS is opening a CHIPS case. That stands for Child in Need of Protection or Services. Emergency custody placement is already in motion." Joseph sat up straighter. "He's not going back there." "And he won't," Larson said. "CPS determined that returning you home is unsafe. They have approved temporary emergency custody with your uncle starting today." That hit me harder than the arrest part. Not in a bad way, just in a final way. Like someone had taken a marker and drawn a line between before and after. Later that afternoon, a CPS social worker came to the hospital to go over everything. She spoke with Joseph first, then with me. She wasn't unkind, but she didn't sugarcoat anything. "This is a serious case," she said. "The weather conditions alone make this an emergency situation. Combined with the locked door and the lack of supervision, It meets criteria for removal. She explained what would happen next. Temporary custody with Joseph, court hearing scheduled in 48 hours, home evaluations, paperwork, a lot of paperwork. I know it's a lot at once, she said, but you're safe now. That's what matters. 2 days later, we were in court for the emergency protective hearing. It wasn't a dramatic scene or anything. Small room, everyone wearing winter coats because the building's heat wasn't great. The judge looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from seeing too many cases like this. They showed the photos the officers took. The tent sagging under snow, the frozen sleeping bag, the house lit up warm behind it. They held up my hospital record next, pointing out my temperature when I arrived. Officer Larson testified about the conditions. Everything was straightforward. When Mary and Cecilia spoke, it only made things worse. Mary said, "We didn't think it was dangerous. We needed the nursery ready." The judge squinted at her like he couldn't believe the sentence came out of her mouth. Cecilia added, "He could have come inside if he really needed to," which wasn't true and also didn't make sense. The judge asked, "Were the doors locked?" And she hesitated before saying, "Yes, but..." That was enough. The judge took off his glasses and said, "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a matter of willful negligence." He signed the order for emergency custody with Joseph on the spot. When court ended, Mary didn't look at me. Cecilia kept her hands on her stomach like she was the one who needed protection. And Jonathan wasn't there at all. He was still in custody, waiting on a bail hearing. Joseph put a hand on my shoulder as we walked out of the courthouse. "You're with me now," he said. "We'll get things sorted, one step at a time." For the first time in days, maybe weeks, the air outside didn't feel as cold. Moving into Joseph's house didn't feel dramatic. It felt like stepping into a different planet, one where heat actually reached the corners. Doors weren't locked to keep me out, and nobody was waiting for me to slip up. The guest room became mine on day one. Clean sheets, a real bed, a dresser that didn't wobble. It wasn't a huge room, but it didn't need to be. It was warm. That alone made it feel unreal. The no-contact order came through a few days later. The social worker said it plainly. "Your father is prohibited from contacting you in any form." Then she looked at Joseph and added, "And until the next hearing, all contact with either parent has to go through CPS. No drop-ins, no surprise visits." She handed Joseph the paperwork, and he signed it with no hesitation. Jonathan being legally blocked from reaching me didn't feel like victory. It felt like a line being drawn, a really sharp one. Then came the next hearing. The judge didn't waste time. She reviewed the photos, the hospital records, and the police reports, then said the relationship between me and my parents was severely compromised and not appropriate for reunification efforts. She ordered Jonathan to pay child support to Joseph. Jonathan didn't yell. He didn't even look angry. He just sat there like someone unplugged him. Mary stood behind him, clutching her purse with shaking hands. Cecilia wasn't there. CPS was already looking into her separately because of the anticipatory neglect concerns. When it ended, the bailiff escorted Jonathan one way, and we went the other. That should have been the end of the chaos, but it wasn't. 2 evenings later, just after Joseph got home from work, someone knocked on the front door. A sharp, desperate kind of knock. Joseph opened it, and there was Mary. Hair messy, coat half-zipped, eyes puffy. "Please," she said before Joseph even spoke. "I need to talk to my son." Joseph didn't move from the doorway. "You can say whatever you need from right there." "I never meant for things to go this far," she said, voice cracking. "Lawrence, honey, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how bad it was. I never wanted you hurt. We were overwhelmed and..." Joseph cut her off. "Stop. Don't put this on being overwhelmed. You locked a 16-year-old outside in a polar vortex." She flinched at the word locked. "Jonathan told me it was fine," she said quickly. "He said the sleeping bag was warm enough. I believed him." "You didn't check," Joseph snapped. "That's the problem." She looked past him, trying to make eye contact with me. I stayed behind Joseph because my whole body went tense the second I heard her voice. She noticed and took a small step forward. "Lawrence, please. I just want to talk." Joseph raised his hand slightly. Not threatening, just firm. "No, he doesn't owe you a conversation. He doesn't even owe you a glance." She looked like she might cry, but Joseph didn't soften. "You need to leave," he said. "There's a no-contact order for Jonathan." And CPS was clear. You don't show up here and try to talk to him directly. If you want contact, you go through the social worker. That's how this works now. "I'm not pressuring." "You came here without clearance," Joseph said. "That's all I need to know." Mary stood there a moment, breathing hard, eyes moving between us like she didn't know which direction to beg. Finally, her voice cracked again. "I miss him. she whispered. Joseph didn't budge. You should have missed him when he was freezing 10 feet from your back door. She covered her mouth with her hand, turned away, and walked back to her car. She didn't slam the door or peel out. She just left like someone moving through fog, headlights sweeping across the snow before she disappeared down the street. Joseph shut the door gently, then locked it. Not out of fear, but out of finality. You don't have to worry about her showing up again, he said. If she does, the social worker will handle it. I nodded, even though my heart was pounding. Not from fear, just impact. After that, the house settled again. Quiet, steady, predictable. A week later, the first snowfall I watched from inside came. Big flakes falling slow, piling on the fence and the trees. I stood at the window with a mug of hot chocolate Joseph handed me without comment. Outside, everything was white and cold and distant. Inside, the heater hummed. The windows didn't rattle. The air didn't sting my skin. And for the first time, watching snow didn't make my stomach clench. I wasn't on the wrong side of the glass anymore. I was home. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.